This game has seen no shortage of balance patches, and like any other game, after a while some players have started complaining about power creep. Being able to breathe on dry land used to be an incredibly unique and powerful perk, but now it's basically par for the course with around half of the player base. Being able to see and respond to the actions of other players used to be an incredible advantage, one that literally invalidated a huge number of popular playstyles. The same could be said about warm-blooded respiration, pair bonding and offspring rearing, eusociality, and even flight. And yet, even after an uncountable number of game updates, balance patches, and expansion packs, one of the most consistent builds in the meta is the Jellyfish, a collection of ancient builds which usually have a grand total of 0 of the aforementioned abilities. Today we're going to discuss why the Jellyfish, as well as other Nadarian and Jelly-like builds, have been able to stand the test of time. We'll talk about the most notable members of the faction, and place them all on the Jellyfish tier list. But first, an overview of the history of the Jellyfish build, plus a quick rundown of the typical stats and abilities they tend to have. Jellyfish have some of the strangest stat spreads in the entire game. The most obvious quirk is that their intelligence and perception stats are basically 0. Jellyfish have no central nervous system, and so essentially all intelligence and perception-based abilities are completely locked on their skill tree. The lack of a brain means Jellyfish have to play mostly on autopilot, and rely on pre-programmed reflexes and instincts to steer them away from danger and towards food. But those aren't their only extremely weird stats. Jellyfish possess some incredible regenerative abilities and can recover from basically any damage, which is good because Jellyfish have next to no defense at all. They're comprised of around 95% water, and their outer layer is a simple jelly-like substance that offers very little protection. Luckily, because of the fact they're almost entirely composed of water, they blend in quite well with the water. Many of them are nearly invisible, and all are translucent to some extent, which makes them extremely difficult to detect via eyesight. What most players know about Jellyfish, though, is how absolutely cracked their damage stat is. The Jellyfish's special ability, Nematocyst, allows for massive venom damage upon even the slightest contact with their tentacles. This isn't universal, as some jellyfish possess far more potent venom than others, a topic we'll cover extensively during the tier list portion of this video. But nonetheless, most competent players fear getting too close to any jellyfish because of their deadly reputation. Their stat spread may seem completely nonsensical until you realize what the meta was like when the Jellyfish was first added to the game. I've covered quote-unquote ancient builds before on this channel, builds like the Shark, Scorpion, and Centipede, but Jellyfish vastly predate all of them. Jellyfish were one of the first, if not the first, major faction of multicellular builds, and so they had very little need for defenses and intelligence when there was very little to defend yourself from or to outsmart. Drifting along filter feeding on plankton worked just fine. Some might argue it still does. Even though cephalopods, fish, and arthropods were added to the game soon after, Jellyfish remained extremely popular. So after 500 million years of balance patches and game updates, let's see which Jellyfish builds come out on top. At the bottom of the tier list we've got the Moon Jelly, one of the most common Jellyfish builds in the game, and yet one that doesn't really make use of the Jellyfish build's more interesting abilities. Moon Jellies have uniquely short tentacles which deal fairly minimal damage. This makes them much less of a threat than basically all other jellies. In addition to that, Moon Jellies are notably more nutritious than other jellyfish, making them common targets for any player that's able to survive their fairly minimal defenses. In fact, Moon Jellyfish are one of the only jellyfish which are actively preyed upon by other jellyfish, even when fully grown. The Moon Jelly's playstyle is entirely passive, relying on its quick respawn rate and strong matchup against plankton to make it worthwhile. Moon Jellies are becoming a popular choice in the recent meta as they have a natural resistance to microplastic poisoning, negating one of the main challenges other marine players have had to learn to adapt to recently. So it is a solid starter build for players trying to learn the ocean meta, but one that I think most competent players will quickly move on from. Next in F tier we have the Comb Jelly. Comb Jellies are some of the most unique jellyfish builds in the game. In fact, even calling them jellyfish is contentious as they are technically not part of the Nadarian faction. Nonetheless, they are gelatinous and have most of the same abilities as jellyfish, so I wanted to include them anyway. Their main difference is that comb jellies do not move by pulsing their bell, and instead swim by using rows of cilia. This offers a slightly greater degree of agility and control compared to your standard jellyfish build. Their tentacles are also slightly different, being lined with adhesive glue rather than venomous microbarbs. This is quite efficient at capturing small prey, but is completely useless on defense. And because they still do not possess an advanced nervous system, the fact that they have greater control over their movement via their cilia doesn't amount to that big of an advantage in practice. They still can't dodge predator attacks because they cannot dodge an attack that they don't know is coming. This build has a lot of potential if they can just put a few more points into intelligence, but for now I'm still going to place them in F tier. At the bottom of D tier we have the Sea Nettle. The Sea Nettle is essentially the most basic, average jellyfish build in the game. It embodies every feature of the archetype, yet excels at none of them and doesn't really have any additional unique abilities. The Sea Nettle has decent length tentacles that can inflict solid damage, potentially lethal to builds within its own weight class, but still not strong enough to really merit the extreme caution their reputation has impressed on the player base. With low-medium size and the same nearly non-existent nervous system, Sea Nettles may be more well-defended than the Moon Jelly, but with even the slightest bit of clever counterplay, they still fall apart immediately. Next, in D tier we have the Coral. You might be surprised to see Coral on the Jellyfish tier list, and indeed I am stretching the definition a little bit, but they are a part of the Cnidarian faction, and are less different once you look more closely. Their early game is pretty much identical to the Jellyfish, but rather than remaining free-floating, they settle onto rocks and surfaces along the seabed and attach to a single point, dropping their mobility stat to 0 for the remainder of their playthrough. To compensate, Corals then activate their signature ability, Calcify, constructing an incredibly sturdy exoskeleton around themselves, and massively buffing their defense stat in the process. As this exoskeleton grows, the Coral will also clone itself, eventually granting the player control over an entire colony of Coral, all to accomplish one thing: AFK experience farming. Once established, the hard part of their playthrough is over, and they can now filter feed for essentially as long as they like. So an easy build to play if you can make it past their vulnerable planktonic early game, although unfortunately the climate change balance patch seems to be a pretty harsh nerf to this playstyle. And at the top of D tier we have the other colonial Cnidarian, the Manowar. This build sports medium damage, much higher than the Moon Jelly or Sea Nettle, but still not the instant death level venom that some of the higher tier jellyfish have. Like other jellyfish, it has low mobility and terrible defenses. But I would say that the Manowar is uniquely vulnerable to predation due to the fact that rather than having a bell to propel itself through the water, instead the Manowar has a balloon, making them very easy to detect and attack from above, where many seabirds hunt. In addition, any damage to the balloon could easily cause it to deflate, sending the Manowar straight to the depths for an instant game over, which negates the advantage most jellyfish have of being able to regenerate from minor to moderate damage. Lastly, the Manowar seems to be uniquely vulnerable to getting beached during severe storms, likely also due to their positioning on the surface of the water, where they get beaten around by the waves and the wind. Still, not something you want to be trading hits with if you're a fish. In C tier we have the Lion's Mane. This is the largest jellyfish build in the game, sporting a massive HP stat and tentacles that can reach lengths of 120 feet, longer than the blue whale end to end. Giant as it may be, its power stat is still below average, as its venom still isn't really enough to take down anything much larger than a minnow. You would think a bigger jellyfish would go after bigger prey, but similar to the whale, it uses its large size to hit a larger area with its attacks, with the hope of getting frequent multi-kills. Its large size makes it very difficult to kill, simply by nature of it being able to literally survive half of itself being eaten. And there isn't much out there that would need to eat more than half. Still, with its stings being fairly weak, they aren't really threatening enough to merit placement in the higher tiers. Moving on up to B tier, we have the Anemone. Similar to Coral, Anemones are closely related to jellyfish, but opt for a sedentary playstyle rather than a free-roaming one. Unlike Coral though, Anemones protect themselves using powerful venomous stingers rather than a hard calcified exoskeleton. Rather than filter feeding on plankton like corals do, they also use this venom to catch and kill prey. Many of them possess extremely powerful venom, enough to cause organ failure even in larger builds like humans. Now, normally being completely immobile is a huge vulnerability. However, the reason I rank Anemones so high in spite of this weakness is that Anemones are some of the best team combo builds in the entire game, forming excellent team comps with both clownfish and crabs. In the case of the clownfish, the anemone and the clownfish cover each other's weaknesses, deterring the predators that the other is vulnerable to. Similar to jellyfish, anemones are vulnerable to sea turtles, as they are resistant to their venom. Clownfish valiantly fight for their teammate, even against those sea turtles which are gargantuan by comparison. And in return, predatory fish that would love to score an easy kill on a small, vulnerable fish need to tank a mouthful of nematocysts to even have a chance at attacking a clownfish. And in the crab's case, rather than fighting off turtles, the crab will actually attach the anemone to itself, gaining venom damage on its own attacks in exchange for granting the anemone its mobility back. So, while probably only low to mid-tier on its own, The combo potential of this build makes it an optimal choice in many scenarios and bumps it up to B tier. And finally, jumping all the way up to S tier, we have the Box Jelly. When it comes to overpowered venom, there is quite literally not a single character in the game that has the Box Jelly beat. Its neurotoxic venom is extremely deadly, rapidly paralyzing the victim, quickly leading to suffocation and cardiac arrest. In addition to having the highest damage of any jellyfish, box jellies also have the highest stealth stat. While many jellyfish sport a wide range of translucent colors like red and blue, box jellyfish are almost completely transparent, as close to invisible as possible. In addition, because they sport fewer tentacles, and therefore experience less hydrodynamic drag, and because of their unique bell shape which allows them to jet through the water, box jellyfish have the highest mobility stat of any jelly. This makes them incredibly difficult to detect and avoid as they zoom through coastal waters, leading many players to simply avoid the territory entirely rather than risk potential encounters. The hallmark of a high-tier build. And as if all of that wasn't cracked enough, box jellyfish are unique in that they're the only jellyfish which have eyes, allowing them to detect danger and avoid obstacles. This enables them to thrive in less open areas where prey like to hide, such as kelp forests or mangrove swamps. Coupled with their higher mobility stat, this actually enables the box jellyfish to actively pursue prey, rather than simply drifting with the current and hoping to catch something. With the exception of tankiness and tentacle attack range, box jellyfish are strictly superior to all other jellies, which is why they're such an outlier on the tier list. I also wanted to highlight a unique member of the box jelly faction, the Irukandji. The Irukandji is a dwarf variant of the box jelly, maxing out at only an inch or two long, yet also sports the same incredibly potent toxin, and all of the other special traits that the box jelly possesses, plus one additional trait, bell stingers. Most jellyfish have a pretty massive weak point, their bell. It can be attacked safely without the risk of being stung, so long as the attacker avoids the tentacles. The Irukandji simply does not have this weakness, as every millimeter of its surface is covered in the same deadly stingers. As a result, even accidentally bumping into the Irukandji can result in an instant game over, which has a lot of players worried given how much more popular this build has become lately. This is obviously a super risky playstyle though, as the Irukandji itself has the lowest HP stat of any build I've ever covered on this channel. Even just swimming into an obstacle is damaging enough to kill an Irukandji, so they need to play extremely carefully, and can't take advantage of the obstacle-heavy environments that the other box jellies can. So that's the jellyfish tier list. Generally, I rate most of them low to mid-tier, with the exception of the truly formidable outlier of the box jelly. Before we wrap up, I do want to cover some counterplay options. I mentioned it a few times in the video, but sea turtles have a flat-out unlosable matchup against jellyfish, being completely immune to their venom, and so they are able to safely attack and digest them. But another lesser-known but even more effective counter to jellyfish is the sea slug. Not only are they immune to the venom, but they can actually absorb the stingers and convert them into their own defensive weapons, basically giving them all the deadly benefits of the jellyfish without the drawback of being basically brainless. I expect both of these builds to become a lot more popular as jellyfish numbers continue to increase. So if you're looking to score some easy wins, I recommend learning the strategies of both of these excellent builds. I hope to do a sea slug video soon, so be on the lookout for that, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it when it drops. And speaking of not missing important video releases, I'd like to remind all my viewers that the best way to watch my content is with Nebula, the sponsor of this video. It's best for you because you'll get access to all of my videos, as well as videos from hundreds of other excellent creators, early and ad-free. And it's best for me because watching on Nebula supports my channel better than anywhere else, helping me bring you the highest quality original content that I can. These 3D animations in my recent videos aren't cheap to create, but I know you guys like them, and I want to make sure this channel looks the absolute best that it can. Now, while you could just pay sticker price, as one of the owners of Nebula, I know a couple of tricks for how to get it even cheaper, including one we haven't talked about in ads before. There are two main ways. First, you may remember a while back that I promoted a bundle subscription service containing both CuriosityStream and Nebula. Many of you signed up for that in order to support me, and I appreciate that, but unfortunately that arrangement has ended. Luckily, Nebula never updated their pricing, so you can still get Nebula for the same crazy low price of only $2.50 a month if you go with their annual subscription. The other way is to buy one of their lifetime memberships. These are a one-time purchase that grants you permanent access to the subscription. This may seem costly, but believe me, I can think of at least a half dozen streaming services that I desperately wish offered this sort of deal, especially with how many subscriptions have been raising their prices lately. The lifetime membership also funds big-budget original projects much more directly. So if you'd like to see me really shoot for the moon with some big projects, this is absolutely your best option. I would not expect these sorts of deals to be around much longer, especially the lifetime membership one. So if you're interested, you can either scan the QR code on screen, head to nebula.tv/tierzoo, or click the link in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, good luck out there.